Hello and welcome. This is Spotlight Ukraine, trans-world politics and deep analytics made by the Ukrainian journalists to the whole globe. Zelenskyy at White House for historic meeting with Biden. What is left of the records? More than 300 days and more than 100,000 invaders killed. How far Putin is ready to go? U.S. to promise Patriot missile system to Ukraine. Is this gonna be a new fight for Ukraine's sky? What else Zelenskyy will bring from Washington, D.C.? This is Spotlight Ukraine. More of this right now.
300 days. Hard to believe. 300 days. We're going through this, and Putin is ways to...
We defeated Russia in the battle for minds of the world. We have no fear, nor should anyone in the world have it. Ukrainians gained this victory, and it gives us courage, which inspires the entire world. Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking.
We're going to continue to strengthen Ukraine's ability to defend itself, particularly air defense, and that's why we're going to be providing Ukraine with Patriot missile batteries.
Till now, Russia has already lost more than 100,000 personnel, 3,000 tanks and about 6,000 other armored vehicles in Ukraine. Bakhmut is still the hottest spot on the front line, but no significant movement from both sides detected. Towns and villages in Donetsk and Luhansk regions suffer from constant shelling, as well as Ukrainian army carries out numerous strikes on the areas of concentration of personnel, weapons and equipment. Details from the front line in our War Map review.
Ukraine-Russia War Map, Fighting Overview. Bakhmut has become the culminating point at the front. Near Bakhmut, Russian forces have concentrated the most combat-capable units of the Wagner PMC mercenaries, artillery and other equipment. Ukraine's armed forces have also brought 2 additional brigades. Bakhmut. The reinforcements that came to help defend Bakhmut managed to almost completely stop the enemy's advance both in the city and on its northern, eastern and southern outskirts. Due to the fact that Ukraine's armed forces destroyed 2 large munitions depots in Kadiyivka and Irmino at the end of the week, the use of Russian artillery, which is concentrated around Bakhmut, significantly decreased. At the same time, the military notes that it was near Bakhmut that the occupying Russian forces, for the first time during the war, began to outnumber the Ukrainian troops in drones and thermal imaging, which enabled them to conduct successful night attacks in open terrain. The main battles continue in the area of Klishchiivka and Kurdyumivka in the south and Pidgorodne in the north. From the east, the enemy began to destroy private buildings on the left bank of the Bakhmutivka River. However, the Ukrainian defense forces conducted successful counterattacks and partly drove the Russian enemy from the residential buildings into the industrial area. Meanwhile, the Russian Nazis completely occupied Yakovlivka, northeast of Solidar, and also advanced to a distance of up to 1 kilometer west of Bilohorivka and Berestove. In fact, these are the only frontline successes of the occupiers this week. Luhansk region. Despite the fact that battles are taking place along the entire front line with a length of more than 100 kilometers, there are practically no changes on the map. Except for one, but very significant one. Ukraine's armed forces advanced no less than 1.5 kilometers south of Kreminna. Southern Front. On the left bank of the Dnieper River in the Kherson region, Ukrainian more accurate and long-range artillery continues to destroy the invading forces and drive them as far as possible from Kherson, which the Russian troops mercilessly bombard every day.
A historic meeting between the presidents of Ukraine and the United States took place this week. The visit to Washington was the first departure from Ukraine for Volodymyr Zelenskyy since the beginning of the full-scale war. Mr. Zelenskyy met with Joe Biden and made a speech in the U.S. Congress. The president of Ukraine thanks the United States of America for its support in the war against the Russian aggressor. And Joe Biden assured that the United States would help us until the end of this war and confirmed the transfer of the Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine.
Today, I'm announcing the next tranche of our security assistance to Ukraine. $1.85 billion package of security assistance that includes both direct transfers of equipment that Ukraine needs, as well as contracts to supply ammunition Ukraine will need in the months ahead for its artillery, its tanks, and its rocket launchers.
Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way.
And now let's get the latest update from the Voice of America White House correspondent Misha Komadovsky, who joins me now from Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome. So, what Volodymyr Zelenskyy will return to Ukraine with?
Well, I need munition, not a riot. If you remember, Volodymyr, that's exactly what President Zelenskyy said at the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And now he's coming back home after his first foreign trip over the last 300 days with a long list of weaponry where the Patriot system has its very special place. This surprise visit to Washington, D.C. was designed to send a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin and to the entire world, actually, that the United States will be there for Ukraine for as long as it takes. Zelenskyy thanked the U.S. leadership and, what's important, ordinary Americans for their support of Ukrainians in fighting off Russia's invasion and pressed for continued aid in the brutal months to come. Joe Biden and Congress responded with billions in new assistance and a pledge to help Ukraine achieve a just peace. President Biden announced the next round of American security assistance for Ukraine. A $1.85 billion package includes direct transfers of equipment that Ukraine needs right now and contracts to supply munition in the months ahead. We're talking about artillery, we're talking about tanks here, and rocket launchers. At the beginning of the Oval Office meeting, President Zelenskyy presented Biden with an award that was earned by the HIMARS battery captain named Pavel. And it was quite an emotional moment, I have to say. I was there and I saw that. And after we left, President Biden gave President Zelenskyy in return 2 command coins. One was for the Ukrainian hero who wanted the president to have this medal, and one was for President Zelenskyy himself. Ukrainian president wrapped up his visit to Washington with an impassioned speech before a joint session of the U.S. Congress, saying that Ukraine's struggle will define in what world our children and our grandchildren will live.
Thank you. That was really a historic visit to the United States. Misha Komadovsky, right from Washington, D.C. Ruins, deaths, and terrible crimes. This is what the Russian army leaves behind in Ukrainian cities. Our journalists returned from Izium and Liman. These cities are already free from invaders, but they will feel the consequences of the occupation for a long time.
Everyone puts sugar as we like.
This is a basement of one of the high-rise buildings in Liman, Donetsk region. Anatoly and his neighbors arranged a real hostel here with 34 people living inside during the most difficult times.
I made the stove myself. My neighbor Yurko helped me a little bit. When there was a lot of shooting in the city, we invited everyone we could to our place. How did you survive the occupation? In the basement. Did you see the stoves outside? We used them to cook. A woman was killed there. We buried her under shelling.
The armed forces of Ukraine liberated Liman on October the 1st. Some of the residents left, and Anatoly still lives in the basement because Russians are constantly shelling buildings and communications in Liman. Recently, a shell hit a nearby high-rise building.
It was a Russian shell, we know for sure. It came from their side. Half the houses was demolished. What happened to the people? There were about 20 people in the building. they were hiding in the basement, but some of them were wounded.
Mikhailo also stayed in Liman throughout the occupation. He shows us how Russians destroyed the city.
This is our bakery. Well, it used to be. It was completely smashed, everything burned down.
Now about 7,000 people live in Liman, while before the Russian invasion there were 20,000 inhabitants. Almost 90% of the city is still without electricity. There is no heating and gas supply is only partially restored. Utilities are carrying out repairs under fire. Alexander is trying to find at least some of his surviving property among the ruins of a high-rise building in the city of Izum, Kharkiv region.
I want to take out my sofa. Anyway, it cost me $100. You can see for yourself what the occupiers left behind. They destroyed and stole everything. I don't know how to survive the winter.
The man also felt the mockery of the occupiers.
They came, they undressed me, and they were looking for some tattoos. They said, "We don't like you." I said, "How can you not like me? This is my hometown." I had tears in my eyes.
Russians destroyed almost 90% of the buildings in Izum. One bomb killed 50 civilians in this 9-story residential building.
I was lying on a couch, watching a plane and rockets flying one after another.
32-year-old Yulia remembers the occupation as a terrible nightmare.
There were 9 of us in one room: my parents, my sister, my son, and my neighbors, along with our pets. There was almost no food, and we were constantly afraid that something will come or we will be killed.
Ukrainian military liberated Izum on September the 10th. A mass grave of people killed by the occupiers was found in the forest on the outskirts. In total, investigators exhumed more than 440 bodies, and most of them had traces of violent death. The invaders also mined the city, and after the occupation, 36 people exploded on mines in Izum. However, now the citizens are gradually returning to normal life.
We have electricity and water and gas too. There is no heating in the city center because the boiler facility has been destroyed.
Recently, the post office and Oshad Bank have started working in the city. Several shops and pharmacies are operating again. The local market is still empty, but several grocery stores are already working.
Fortunately, the heating is on the outskirts. The trade is slowly going on. People have no money, and there are very few people left in the city.
After the deoccupation, more than 5,000 people have already returned to Izum, the local authorities report. But only part of them remained in the city because the occupiers destroyed the housing infrastructure.
Liam Collins, former director of the Modern War Institute at West Point, United States, joins Spotlight Ukraine. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
So let's talk a bit about the promised Patriot system. How long will it take to train Ukrainian soldiers to operate the Patriot system?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly advanced system, right? One of the world's best. So it probably will take several weeks to actually get them up to speed on it. And then you got to transport the system over there. So you're talking, weeks to months before it's going to be able to be gainfully employed by the Ukrainians within the country.
So it got to be like mid-January or maybe even the early February days till we see Patriot system on the front line, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're thinking, early February at the earliest. But until then, right, they have their other anti-aircraft and anti-missile defense systems that they've employed to date that have been able to shoot down 70 to 80% of rockets and missiles coming in from Russia.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Russia claims that in case United States provides Ukraine with Patriot system, it will definitely lead to escalation. What kind of escalation can it be? What are your thoughts?
I mean, Russia hasn't shown it. I mean, they can't escalate the conflict. They have all their forces in there. They've been fighting pretty ineffectively to date. So there's really no way for them to escalate this beyond what they're doing other than just trying to shoot missiles at civilian complexes. But that's not really escalating the tactical fight. So Russia's just incapable of employing more forces effectively within Ukraine. So it's really just propaganda by Russia.
Just words and threats and nothing more.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, they don't have the ability to, if they could do more, they would actually be fighting more effectively, taking Ukrainian terrain, and they're not.
Yeah, that makes point. So, do we have to expect that the United States can provide Ukraine with much more anti-missile systems to close the sky over the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to do, right? I mean, at the beginning of the conflict, they were shooting down about 30% of the Russian missiles that were coming in. It's up to about 70 to 80% now, and you really want to get that up in the higher 90%. And so they've shown that ability to do it with the Patriot missile systems. I think they'll be able to get up into the 90% and be able to shoot down many of those Russian missiles. So it's definitely a possibility, depending on how many missile systems they're able to employ.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And can I ask you, as an expert, what is your personal scenario of the ending of this war? Is it going to be like a negotiation, or should we fight till we liberate like Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk region?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a long, drawn-out fight until the territory is liberated, right? I mean, we saw in 2014, 2015, Ukraine never got any closer to getting Donetsk and Luhansk back, or Crimea. And so any kind of negotiated settlement, no one has any expectation that they're going to be able to get that terrain back. And so it's going to be a fight until the territory can be liberated by the Ukrainians, because the Russians aren't going to into any negotiations with any intent of ever giving them back in the long term.
So no negotiations, but we know that Russia has already mobilized more than 100,000 of people, and there are plans to mobilize more and more. So it's going to be long.
Yeah, so I mean, but keep in mind, right? I mean, Russia's best forces were at the beginning of the conflict, and those were decimated. And so as Russia throws more at it, they're less trained, they're ill-equipped. Their morale is even lower than the Russians were at the beginning of the war. Many of these people don't even want to be in the military. And so they're putting more forces at it, but they're less and less capable every day that they employ new forces. In the conflict where the Ukrainians, I mean, it's a brutal fight for them, but the morale is there. They're fighting for the defense of their nation, where even the Russian military has no idea why they're there. So they're not motivated. So it'll be long, just because Russia has so many forces.
We got a saying in Ukraine that Russian army is not big, it's just long.
Yeah, I mean, it's big in terms of its effective. I mean, in terms of if sure numbers you're counting soldiers, but if you're talking about effective soldiers, I'll take one Ukrainian soldier over 20 Russian soldiers any day.
Well, this winter gonna be like the definite moment we can say that after this, Ukraine can win this war.
I mean, I think Ukraine has demonstrated already that it can win this war. I think it's just a matter of time, and part of that depends on continuing to get resupplied from the West, because they are a smaller military. They have to replace their losses that are attrited throughout the conflict. But as long as they're able to replace their combat losses, Ukraine has demonstrated over the last 10 months, and really within the first month of the war in the defense of Kyiv, that they can win this. It's just a matter of time and commitment by Ukraine and by its supporters.
Ben Hodges already said that Ukraine can liberate Crimea till the end of summer 2023. I agree. Can we rely on that forecast?
No, I think it's going to take longer than that, especially if you're talking. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be years, several years.
Several years.
I mean, to liberate everything, I think Crimea is going to be its own challenge there. I mean, you see how slow it's. I mean, Ukraine's been able to make some of these large advances right down in Kherson and outside of Kharkiv, but keep in mind, right, that's where Russian forces were not massed. As Russia gets constricted into a smaller and smaller space, right, even though they're less capable, they're not a very capable fighting force. They're still they're still capable of fighting. And so that's going to be the challenge, right? As Russia gets into a smaller and smaller space, it's harder for Ukraine to dislodge them. So that's why it's really, towards the end, it's actually harder to dislodge than easier.
And we do keep in mind that Russia has nuclear weapons. What is the chance that Russia can use the nuclear weapon? Is just the threats like words, or there's gonna be like the moment Putin says?
No, I think it's just words and threats. I mean, if you go back to the end of the beginning of the Cold War, no nation has ever employed nuclear weapons. It's a weapon that establishes, right, a really good defensive measures, right? It prevents other nations from necessarily invading you, but no one has used them, and that's a norm that's driven through the Cold War, through regimes, through stressful times historically that are worse than the days we're in now. And Russia understands that if it employed nuclear weapons, it would be a significant game changer. And Russia's just not going to do something like that.
But yes, but if Putin uses it, so what are the consequences?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely unlikely they would use it. I think you'd really see Russia be isolated. They wouldn't. No one would buy their oil, natural gas, right? Their allies that they have within, semi-support from, whether it's buying goods or whatever, China, India, Iran, right? They're going to be in a position where they're no longer enabled to engage in trade support with them. Effectively, Russia would be completely isolated from the rest of the world, the international system.
But Russia is already pretty isolated. Can we do that just to prevent the nuclear threats?
No,
to put more and more sanctions right now.
Russia's only semi-isolated from the international system. I mean, with the West, they're still, selling gas and oil. I mean, in terms of China, India, there's still a lot of trade going on there. So those sanctions, when you look at those are really Western sanctions with Russia, not international sanctions against Russia.
Do you think that Mr. Putin right now is the most dangerous person all over the globe?
Yeah, I mean, I think presently he's the most dangerous because of what he's engaging in an international conflict that's just, unheard of in recent times. So without a doubt, and he's got a large nuclear arsenal. So those two things, make him probably the most dangerous.
Yeah, I'm asking this question. If he is ready for negotiations.
No, I don't. Russia's in the position of a negotiation. You got to look at it. What would Russia have to gain by negotiating, right? Are they willing to just, basically draw the lines where they all are now, right? Effectively, and I don't think Russia's willing to do that. He has to demonstrate probably a larger win than that, right? He went to the war with multiple war aims. Really, he would have to at least get all of Donetsk and Luhansk, and then maybe that could appease him. But at the same time, Ukrainians would never agree to that. And so there's no overlap between the two. But Russia would have to achieve some kind of victory that it could sell to its populace. At a minimum, that would be Donetsk and Luhansk.
Thank you. Thank you once again for your answers. Liam Collins, former director of the Modern War Institute at West Point, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. And we continue. Ukrainians show incredible resilience and heroism not only on the battlefield. Our power engineers are working around the clock to restore the power system, which is now one of the main targets of Russian terrorists. They work even under fire. Due to massive rocket attacks, the Ukrainian energy system is working on the verge. But now, we managed to avoid the complete blackout, which the Russians hope for.
In the deoccupied Liman, Donetsk region, power engineers work under the cannonade of explosions. The men say that are no longer afraid of every shot, because they have learned to determine by the sound how close the enemy is shooting.
We are restoring the power grids after the hostilities, but there is a lot of work with the new destructions almost every day. Aren't you afraid that the shelling is going on while you are working? It is scary, but we have already got used to it somehow.
Over the past 3 months, Russians have been purposefully destroying the Ukrainian energy system. Starting from October the 10th, they periodically carry out massive rocket attacks on our energy facilities. According to official data, due to the Russian terrorist attacks, about 50% of the energy infrastructure of Ukraine was damaged, including all thermal and hydroelectric power plants. Some of them were completely destroyed. The occupiers destroyed 90% of the solar energy infrastructure. Most of the facilities were located in the south of the country, in the territories that were or remain under occupation. Russians have already fired about 1,000 shells, missiles and drones at Ukraine's energy system. 40% of high-voltage network facilities have been damaged. In particular, 70% have been shelled several times.
Almost half of our main road network and almost all maneuvering capacity was damaged. There is no safety margin anymore. Therefore, first of all, we need a powerful missile defense. Of course, it is very important that the world help us with equipment to restore the power system, but so far all measures are balancing on the brink because of the ongoing shelling. When our power facilities are sufficiently protected, we will need not only equipment, but also ready-made projects for new construction. This situation, I believe, should be used as a chance to move to European standards in the energy sector.
In order to balance the power system, Ukraine now needs mobile power plants, 20, 30 and 50 megawatts, the Ukrenergo national power company emphasizes. Currently, they say there is not enough capacity, so there are both planned and emergency power outages throughout the country. The situation is especially difficult in the central region. In Kyiv, for example, the light is turned on for up to 6 hours a day. But in a week and a half, the city may return to scheduled outages, and the lights will be turned off for up to 10 hours a day, power engineers predict. But this is provided that there will be no new terrorist attacks.
One of the most loyal allies of Ukraine in the war with Russia are the Baltic states. If calculated as a percentage of gross domestic product, Latvia and Estonia are among those who provided Ukraine with the largest military assistance, spending about 0.8% of their GDP. Partners also help with the restoration of the Ukrainian energy system after the Russian terrorist attacks. Estonia has recently sent to Ukraine 11 buses with power equipment, and before that, 10 buses with power generators. This country also constantly acts as a lobbyist for the interests of Ukraine on the world stage. And now I've got another guest of Spotlight Ukraine. This is the ambassador of the Republic of Estonia to Ukraine, Mr. Kaimo Kuusk. Hello and welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Pleasure.
How will Estonia help Ukraine to restore its energy infrastructure?
So we are learning what do you need, and then we are seeking for those equipment from Estonia. We are sending you generators, we are sending you transformers. One of them was 62 tons in weight, so they are really heavy ones. And interesting thing, we just had 2 weeks ago a radio program where we discussed about problems in energy in Ukraine. And after that, one entrepreneur, Estonian one, called in to the radio program and said that, hey, we just changed the old transformers to a new ones, and we didn't know where to put the old ones. So, well, we are sending those to Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Kyiv, you might know this information, could face an apocalyptic scenario this winter if Russia continues to launch airstrikes on Ukraine. So, in case there's going to be an apocalyptic scenario, there's going to be lots of refugees, and one of the countries they can flee to is Estonia. Am I right?
Well, first, we understand it very well. Our embassy team experiencing the situation in Kyiv by ourselves, me included. At the moment, for Christmas time, I'm shortly in Estonia, but in the beginning of January, I will be back. If we are talking about different scenarios, we have to be ready for exactly the several ones, including the very, very hard cases. So possible refugees, of course, if you don't have electricity, you don't have warm, you don't have water, it makes people move. And first of all, exactly inside the country, but also towards Europe, including Estonia.
But if I'm not mistaken, Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, said that her country will not be able to help Ukrainian refugees in the amount as before in case of new wave of refugees begins. Could you comment on that?
Estonia has welcomed more than 100,000 Ukrainian refugees, so 65,000 have stayed. We have even opened a special Ukrainian school for Ukrainian kids. But by the way, in February and in March, we in Estonia, we thought that we are able to take only 5,000. So now it's 65. So I'm optimist in nature. So I hope together we are able to avoid the apocalyptic scenario. But even if needed, I'm pretty sure we will find the solutions. For example, Finland have promised that they will help us. They are welcoming then refugees also from Estonia to Finland, because Finland at the moment have treated 45,000 refugees. So we have room, and we're pretty sure that if people are escaping war, we will take them as well.
If I'm not mistaken, when Estonia has become an independent state, the same situation with the crisis was from Russia, and there was a threat of evacuation of Tallinn. Do you remember those times, and what did you do to prevent that?
Absolutely, that was the case. We got independence back, and Russia has not acted differently. Okay, we didn't have war. That case we were lucky, but Russia closed down oil and fuel deliveries to Estonia, so they cancelled all the treaties, thinking that they can then make us go back to Soviet Union or well, some kind of a different union with them. And we really had a scenario. We had the plans where we should evacuate the majority of Tallinn people, the capital of Estonia, to the countryside, where you are heating your flats and houses with wooden ovens. Plus, of course, it's easier to manage with the smaller cities. Actually, you can cope with that. So we really had the plans. But on the last moment, our Finnish neighbors sent 2 tankers of heavy oil for Estonia. They borrowed us money, and we were able to heat the season actually. So yeah, we have gone through similar planning phase at least.
Which country can actually send Ukraine oil tanks?
Well, I think you at the moment have fuel. In May, our embassy team, and not only, all the Ukrainians had problems with car fuel actually. So now it's solved, and it's really good feeling. So I can understand that the liter is more expensive than it was, but you know, and of course you know, it's even worse if you don't have fuel at all. So what Europe can do, we can help you with additional electricity.
Equipment.
We are sending you generators. Our embassy have 2 small generators to heat ourselves up. So with our very good friends, we have a small sauna in embassy as well. We can heat good friends up in Kiev as well, actually. Maybe you know the story that Estonian volunteers sent 1 mobile sauna to militaries in Donbass, actually, for Ukrainians to heat them up, and it's something. We are believing in saunas in Estonia.
Thank you so much, and on behalf of all the Ukrainian nation, to you, to the embassy, to all the Estonian people for your help and for your support. You're really kind and good friends of Ukraine. And I still got the last question. We were talking about the plans, and Valery Zaluzhny has said that he is sure there's going to be another counteroffensive to Kyiv. And now, if I'm not mistaken, you live in the capital of Ukraine. In case of another escalation, are you going to leave Kyiv and go abroad?
No, I think we have adjusted. We have plans, we have resources. We are bringing more military aid. Yes, even Estonia, although we sometimes saying that it's not easy to find more, but we will be sure. So we will bring more military aid. Ukrainian forces are now absolutely more ready to repel some of the attempts from the northern direction. So I think we are with you.
Thank you. Brave and solid, the ambassador of the Republic of Estonia to Ukraine, Kaimo, who was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. We wish you happy holidays, keep safe, and thank you once again for your help. The successful visit of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, to the United States of America has quite annoyed Russian propagandists. So-called Kremlin journalists created tons of fakes and manipulations to depreciate the enormous support of Ukraine from the US. Let's see some of Russia's lies right now.
Biden distorts name of Ukrainian vassal. President Zelenskyy threatens Russians with destruction. Zelenskyy was not welcomed in US. As soon as Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, stepped on the American ground, Russian propaganda went mad. It seems no other topic, even domestic, bothered so-called Russian journalists as much as the meeting of presidents. During a joint speech to reporters, US President Joe Biden called his vassal from Ukraine not Zelenskyy but Belensky, Kremlin-aligned Russian media Ruskaya Vesna reports. Confused about whether Kyiv and Washington are open to peace and negotiations, Biden spoke of his Ukrainian counterpart as Belensky. Belensky, who was standing nearby, endured such neglect without even showing surprise. President Biden did misspeak a word in his address, but right after that, corrected himself.
And President Zelenskyy, you have made it clear that he is open to pursuing, well, let me put it this way. He's not open, but you're open to pursuing peace. You're open to pursuing a just peace.
Split in West, Zelenskyy was not welcomed in US. Kremlin-aligned Russian media Tsargrad states. Journalist Olga Skabeyeva in her Telegram channel showed a video where the split of the West is clearly visible. In the US, Zelenskyy was not welcomed. This is a 6-second video posted by Skabeyeva. And this is the whole video of the Congress reaction to Zelenskyy's address. President Zelenskyy threatens Russians with destruction, Russian media NVL states. During a conversation at the White House, the president of Ukraine mentioned Russia. He stated that the president of the Russian Federation should be interested in preserving the culture and history of the people. According to Ruskaya Vesna, the Ukrainian leader threatened the Russian people with destruction. And the actual Zelenskyy's quote: "I believe that there is something mortal about his inadequate approach to the world. Why we need to send him a message? He needs to be interested in getting attention from the world, because he is not a subject of civilized people. He should be interested in trying to save something of his culture and history of his country. So that's his problem now." All Russian attempts to denigrate Zelenskyy's visit to the USA show how successful it was. At some point, so-called Kremlin journalists do show real disappointment and defeat, especially about the new military package announced by the US, including Patriot air defense systems, heavy armored vehicles and lots of ammunition.
Что касается Патриотов, тут, конечно, не надо недооценивать не только технические характеристики этих систем, но и сам факт. На наших с вами границах, на границах России появляются системы противоракетной обороны США. Абсолютно. То, с чем мы, в принципе, боролись огромное количество лет. Да, я прекрасно помню этот разговор с младшим Путина в Кинебанкварте, когда мы предлагали им использовать азербайджанскую станцию Гавала. И, в принципе, там нам тоже ответили «нет». Но вот теперь американцы, продвигают свои системы и, как им кажется, на легальных основаниях установят их на Украине, я уж не знаю, где еще. В Латвии, Литве, Эстонии, если их там не стоит до сих пор.
And Yuriy Fizer, our global news editor, is already in the studio, and that means one thing: this is high time to talk about the global politics. So let me just tell you one thing. What except the Mr. Zelenskyy visit to White House has happened in the world during the last 7 days, spotlighting Ukraine? Do we have any global news?
Yes, we do, Volodymyr. Well, first of all, hello. Yes, we do. And I will talk more today about Russia and Belarus, maybe unfortunately, but I will talk. So why did Putin and Lukashenko meet in Minsk this week? Do they plan a new assault against Ukraine? Is Russian army capable of new massive offensive in our country? Well, we'll talk also about the resilience of the Ukrainian people and of the Ukrainian army on the front lines. And of course, we'll talk about the help that is coming from our Western friends and partners. So this and more in my part of Spotlight Ukraine today.
Sounds great.
Yes, of course. And for the first time, Putin came to Lukashenko to Minsk. They met again, but this time President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, hosted the president of aggressor country, Volodymyr Putin. They talked, according to both of them, mostly about the economy, but security issues were also on the table. Lukashenko said that the West should listen to the voice of reason and resume the dialogue on security guarantees with Russia. Whether Putin has convinced Lukashenko to involve the Belarusian army in the so-called special military operation is still unknown. We'll see. And we must be prepared for the fact that it can happen, unfortunately, Volodymyr. And administration of the U.S. President Joe Biden warned Alexander Lukashenko, warned very seriously. The United States of America is monitoring the activity of the Belarusian army. And in case of its involvement in the Russian war in Ukraine, we are ready to respond, it said the White House. This was stated during the briefing at the U.S. Department of State by its spokesman Ned Price. At the same time, he also explained what he means. If Lukashenko decides to bring his troops into the territory of Ukraine, the Joe Biden administration will immediately impose sanctions against Belarus. He also stressed that Washington continues to be in close contact with the Ukrainian leadership in order to effectively help us fight Russian aggression. And now we are joined by the deputy head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, Pavel Latushko, to talk more about Belarus, Russia, Alexander Lukashenko, and, of course, Ukraine. Mr. Latushko, greetings and thanks for joining us.
Приветствую вас.
So my first question to you will be as follows. Will there be an attack against Ukraine from the territory of Belarus?
В настоящий момент мы наблюдаем.
For the time being, we see and we observe a pretty active stage for the preparation of a possible aggression from the territory of Belarus. There are constant military trainings on the territory of Belarus, and the grouping of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of Belarus is increasing. Right now, the mobilization is actually suspended, or the preliminary military registration, and also right now it is just about to press certain button. We see that certain equipment has been sent to the military base. And right now Lukashenko assists Putin from the territory of Belarus to build up the opportunity of the possible invasion. The question of invasion, this is the question of future, and this scenario is pretty real because Putin is interested to use the strategic position of Belarus in the war against Ukraine, and Lukashenko is a puppet of Putin and will carry out every his order. And moreover, during the last visit of Putin to Minsk, Putin paid him dearly, billions of US dollars.
Do you have the facts that Mr. Putin has already paid Lukashenko so much money?
В ходе этого визита главная тема была экономическая, публичная, по крайней
мере. The main topic, public topic, was that behind the closed doors, the main topic was the military and political situation and the usage of the Lukashenko's regime and the territory of Belarus for the further aggression. We have heard that the Lukashenko's regime wants to have gas out of Russia at the cost $60–80 US
думаю, что эта стоимость будет близка к этому в сравнении с тысячами долларов, которые платит Европа. Одновременно Лукашенко получил заверение со стороны Путина о строительстве третьего блока белорусской атомной электростанции, к двум, которые уже построены за 10 миллиардов кредитных ресурсов России, за которые Лукашенко еще не начал платить. Путин перенес долговые обязательства Беларуси до 2028 года, а ведь фактически Россия является главным кредитором режима Лукашенко. Лукашенко достиг также возможности без ограничений доступа на рынок Российской Федерации. Объявлено также о ряде проектов импортозамещения. Это $1,5 миллиарда США инвестиций в военно-промышленный комплекс Беларуси. Так что Лукашенко фактически за подаренный букет Путину получил огромный ресурс. Вы только что показали этот букет в вашем сюжете. Но действительно ли кто-то из западных политиков или политологов верит в то, что за букет роз Путин заплатил миллиарды Лукашенко? Нет, он заплатил за готовность Лукашенко вступить в войну, предоставить территорию и открыть границу. Я думаю, что в начале следующего года для повторной попытки вхождения вооруженных сил России в сопровождении белорусских военных на территорию Украины.
What or maybe whom is Lukashenko afraid of right now?
Лукашенко боится прежде всего потерять свою власть. Власть – это то, что движет им, и то, что он хочет иметь до конца своей жизни, до последнего дня. Конечно же, он боится белорусский народ, белорусское общество, и поэтому до сегодняшнего дня он не принял решение о направлении вооруженных сил Беларуси в Украину. Не потому, что он давит, на него давит Путин или слабо давит Путин. Я вообще опровергаю тезис
reject the thesis that Lukashenko is somehow looping around. Yes, he roams around Putin and Putin. It means that Lukashenko wants to receive more economic bonuses from Putin in exchange of the support of the strategic goals of Russia in the war in Ukraine. Therefore, right now, his main fear as of today, if the Russian armed forces will go into Ukraine, there will be lots of corpses. It will trigger certain reaction. Is it necessary for Putin right now to make Lukashenko send his troops in Ukraine? And my answer is no, because if this happens, there will be pre-revolutionary crisis in Belarus, and this crisis will need to be fought by Putin as well. Therefore, right now, this is not scenario, and I think that the politicians politologists that assume this scenario, they are mistaken, because we understand that if there will be more larger grouping at the territory of Belarus, and this will be the condition.
So you have already started to talk about the possible crisis in Belarus. So my last question to you will be about this crisis. But let us first hear what the spokesman of the State Department of the United States of America, Ned Price, said, and then I will ask a question.
The reported claim from President Putin that he has no intention of, as you said, absorbing anyone in his talks with Lukashenko. Look, I think a statement like that has to be treated as the height of irony, coming from a leader who is seeking, at the present moment, right now, to violently absorb his other peaceful next-door neighbor. We saw Russian forces mass inside what should have been sovereign Belarusian territory. We've seen attacks launched from what should be sovereign Belarusian territory. And now we hear these comments from President Putin and from Lukashenko. But I think the track record speaks much louder than anything these two leaders could say.
So, Mr. Latushko, my last question to you is as follows. When will Belarusians overthrow Lukashenko and regain their independence? I mean true independence, not the one Lukashenko is always talking about.
Я считаю, что может быть два сценария, на которые также стоило бы обратить внимание нашим западным партнерам. Конечно, изменение ситуации в Беларуси – это прежде всего в руках самих белорусов. Но я считаю, что тот факт, что сегодня не осуществляется давление в отношении режима Лукашенко, не вводятся санкции, санкции непропорциональны в отношении России, гораздо меньше, создает ему бонусы, возможность быть контрабандистом 21 века. Если бы сейчас
certain smuggler of the 21st century. If there was bigger pressure on Lukashenko, if there was certain direction for him to Hague, there will be certain chances for the Belarusian people to overthrow regime earlier than it happens in Russia. If West cannot cope with a small dictator, is it possible for the West to cope with a bigger one? And the second scenario, which is more probable, and I would like again to highlight the first scenario as well. The second scenario is what we believe and what we support. This is the victory of Ukraine. And our volunteers, Belarusian military unions, they also fight within armed forces of Ukraine. And we understand that the victory of Ukraine is really, really important for us to change the situation in our country. But we also have to use three factors. The first one, this is the internal underground movement, and we are working on it. The second factor is to have certain pro-armed forces within the military armed forces of Ukraine. And the third factor, this is international acknowledgement of the Unified Transitional Committee of Belarus. These are three main pillars that we can stand on and change the situation in Belarus in future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. This was Pavel Latushko, the deputy head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus. And now we are joined by Colonel Gintaras Bagdonas, former head of Lithuania's military intelligence. Mr. Bagdonas, greetings and thanks for joining.
Yeah, good evening. Good to attend.
Mr. Bagdonas, let's just hear what Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, said, and then I will ask you a question.
So we should not underestimate Russia. Russia is planning for a long war, and actually we also see that they are trying to, after have lost the momentum for some months, they are now trying to regroup, to repair, to enable them to launch new offensives.
Jens Stoltenberg said this a few days ago in his interview to the French television. And in one of your interviews, I mean recent interviews, you said that Ukraine will win by the end of 2023. Why do you think so?
Yeah, I have no doubt about this, that Ukraine will win the war. The victory will be achieved by Ukraine in military way by the end of next year. Most likely, I should carefully to add, most likely by the end of next year. Well, and I do agree with Mr. Stoltenberg's statement saying that we should not underestimate Russia. Even from military, former military officer, I can say that it's very, very bad to underestimate opponent, enemy. Yeah, but my judgment is based on the first of all on the will to find of Ukrainian nation, of Ukrainian people. Another, of course, Russia is another factor. Russia is exhausted. It's already exhausted. However, there we have to be also careful with our assessment of Russian capabilities. Russia still has a huge reserves. For instance, even in open sources, you can see they have roughly about 10,000 tanks in stocks in reserve. Most likely, 2/3 are rusted, not capable, but even then, from 3 tanks you may produce one capable, one operational tank. So it's a huge force. They have a lot of personnel. The good news that Russian soldiers are basically fighting without any motivation. And if we, even theoretically, if we take what is the war? War is a fight of two wills. War is a battle of two wills. And then when we compare your nation, I recently visited Ukraine. I saw a number of many men and women, soldiers and civilians. And I saw determination. I had strong determination and absolute belief. No one doubts about the victory. So how can I?
But Mr. Bagdonas,
yes, please.
Yes, but Mr. Bagdonas, at the same time, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Armed Forces, Yuriy Zelenskyy, he warned that there's going to be another offensive, especially to Kyiv in February and March 2023. Do you believe that Russian army can be able to launch a new offensive?
I do understand what most likely General Zelenskyy, who is very talented military strategist, of course, an excellent chief of defense. But what he said, most likely, I take a liberty to say, he wanted to encourage partner allies to provide with the military support, bigger military support for the victory. But also, as good soldier, you always have to have take in account. You have to take in account the least, at least the least possible, but the most dangerous course of action. Most dangerous course of action, of course, what has been said by General Zelenskyy. But I don't think that even Russians, they are serious about the objective aim, military aim to take Kyiv or even any other city. What they can do, Russians, in my modest opinion, they can launch another, and they most likely they will do another military operation in order having the aim to attract your forces from the counteroffensive, from the on the areas where you may liberate whenever it takes, to distract your armed forces. They may do, but assessing the qualitative status of Russian armed forces, I'm very skeptical about Russia.
And it's good for us. Mr. Bagdonas, is there a possibility that Russia can at least somehow involve NATO into this war?
Little possibility. Little possibility. Firstly, do we like or not? But you know, NATO. It's when we talk NATO, we have to think and to speak about the NATO nations. NATO, nothing more than NATO nations. So there's no single NATO, even no single nation within the alliance which would like to be engaged in the war. Mm-hmm. So unless, I would put comma, unless the NATO, unless there's red line crossed by Russia. Mm-hmm. For instance, nuclear weapons, tactical usage of nuclear weapons. Then I most likely.
Most likely. And what's your modest opinion, as you've just said, are NATO and Western countries helping Ukraine enough to win this war?
Today morning I was listening very impressive and strong speech of your president, of true leader, President Zelenskyy, in the Congress of United States, where he delivered a very, very strong message that Lithuania lives, Ukraine lives, Ukraine fights, but Ukraine also has to win the war. And what we do understand that there's not enough military assistance provided by partners. And you mentioned it just recently, General Zaluzhnyi's interview to The Economist, where he very clearly stated what he needs. 300, at least 300 or about tanks, 500 or a bit more APCs and artillery systems, and so on there. So definitely, what is behind you? Perhaps you will ask me why this support is not coming. And I think one of the biggest issue, partners, allies, or political leaders of the countries, they are afraid of escalation. They don't want to be engaged in the war. Simply, they're afraid of escalation. That's the major obstacle for more decisive actions in providing required military assistance.
Mr. Bagdonas, my last question to you will be as follows. What will be left of Russia after victory?
Oh, your question worth of million, actually. And on the other hand, I think what makes worry many partners, many our Western friends, especially in Western Europe and even in the United States, they feel, I would not say they're scared of future dissolute Russia, but they feel uncomfortable with uncertainty in Russia. Everything might happen, but what I wish, the ideal course of action, if Russia Federation, if we call it federation, well, if it loses the seat in Security Council, then of course somehow Russia has to be de-armed of its military, of its nuclear weapons. Yeah, and of course Russia has to be forced to leave all illegally occupied all its troops from, of course, firstly Ukraine, but not only, and Georgia and Moldova and the gangs of Wagner teams. They have to leave Africa contingent, Latin America, and so on. The issue is the broader Western countries have to come with a strategy how to contain Russia after the victory of Ukraine. Otherwise, it is just a matter of time when it will recover and it become even more aggressive.
Thank you very much, Colonel. This was Gintaras Bagdonas, former head of Lithuania's military intelligence. Thank you very much for your insights. How better help Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression? This is what leaders of the Joint Expeditionary Force nations were discussing in the capital of Latvia, Riga, on Monday. In a joint statement issued after the meeting, the GEF leaders commit to providing further political, military, humanitarian and economic support to Ukraine as long as necessary. Ukraine's victory is essential for the security of us all, they said. We denounced Russia's attacks on critical national infrastructure, which have been staged to terrorize Ukraine's residents, the GEF leaders said in the statement. And this is what Prime Minister of Great Britain said about the possibility of negotiations with Russia.
We must be clear that any unilateral call for a ceasefire by Russia is completely meaningless. in the current context. I think it would be a false call. It would be used by Russia to regroup, to reinforce their troops, and until they have withdrawn from conquered territory, there can and should be no real negotiation.
And so, Volodymyr, I must admit this is a good news for us. No negotiations with Russia and a lot of weapons from our allies and partners. And at the very end, I just want to greet our Western friends with Christmas. May the Christmas season bring only happiness and joy to your countries, you and your families. May it bring enduring peace to Europe in general, in Ukraine in particular. May it bring victory of light over the darkness. Thank you on behalf of all Ukrainians for the help and support. Merry Christmas. And this is all for today in my part of Spotlight Ukraine. More next week. See you next week. And now back to you, Volodymyr.
You've brought just not the insights from the global news, but the smell of the tangerines, in expectation of the Christmas Eve and the Christmas festive. Thank you so much.
I tried.
Thank you. Yuriy Fizer, our global news editor, with some insights from the global news spotlight in Ukraine. And now, some insights from the social media. Fearless Cats of Ukraine, FIFA scandal, and who Ukraine choose for the Eurovision Song Contest in our weekly social media review right now.
After almost a month of football, the FIFA World Cup 2022 in Qatar ended on Sunday, 18th December. Argentina are the world champions. Ukraine, in fact, was not partaking in the championship. However, earlier Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, had asked to appear via video at Sunday's event in Qatar to address the worldwide audience of millions. But FIFA turned down the request. Ukrainian social media criticized soccer's world governing body for refusing to show Zelenskyy's message. No matter who wins today, FIFA has already lost. FIFA not just about football, but values, about civilized world's rules and that you can sort things out without murdering. Unfortunately, FIFA shows lack of understanding of the disaster that Russian Federation is dragging the world into by starting war in Ukraine. It is still not too late to fix it. So at first, FIFA refused to show Zelensky's address because it was too political, and then Macron awarded medals to football players.
At the end of war, Slava Ukraini and happy Qatar Day.
Reduce your expectations to zero.
Eurovision coming. Ukraine has chosen a pop duo Tvorchi for next year's Eurovision Song Contest in a live broadcast from a bomb shelter in Kiev. Musicians will represent the country in Liverpool next year with their song Heart of Steel.
Don't get what you say, don't get how you feel. Get out of my way, yes, I got a heart of steel.
However, it was not without troubles. Katarina Pavlenko, the host and ex-participant of Eurovision, has unintentionally stepped on Krut's this year participant dress. And as always, Ukrainians are ready to come up with new jokes. Ukrainians have already proved how fearless they are. However, here in Ukraine, not just people are venturous, so are cats.
Давай активней, Мурчик. Давай. Пиши, давай. Мурчик, давай резче. Иди сюда.
Russia keeps launching missile and drones attacks. This week, Kyiv suffered more infrastructure damages after Kremlin's onslaught. What amazes me is the brain's protective ability to perceive missiles not as a deadly piece of iron that can kill you at any second, but as something that ruins your plans for the day. Surprisingly. Missiles flying above the head, air defense working, Ukrainians at the market. Give me 5 kilos of potatoes and a kilogram of lard.
While everyone is preparing for Christmas and people all over the world are making plans for the new year 2023, Ukrainians are united by one wish: liberation from the occupiers and peaceful skies overhead. Due to the Russian invasion, many will have to celebrate far from home, and tens of thousands of Ukrainian defenders are far from their families in cold trenches. But in the breaks between rocket attacks and liquidation of their consequences, Ukrainians are decorating their cities for Christmas and New Year. About the festive atmosphere in the middle of the war right now.
Sofia Square in Kiev is shrouded in darkness due to the blackout. The street is illuminated only by the lights of the Christmas tree.
Because of the war, of course, everything is modest, but it's good they put up a Christmas tree. We are not sad to spite the enemies. Through the snow drifts and blizzards, we made it to Ukraine.
And after all, our children need positive impressions and holidays. We hope our child will not remember what the war is like.
The main Christmas tree of Kiev is twice smaller than last year, but more symbolic than ever. Decorated with angels of peace and balloons with flags of the countries that supported Ukraine in the war with Russia. There are 53 of them. The minimal illumination is made by the colors of the Ukrainian flag. And this Christmas tree at the capital's railway station shines without electricity at all. It glows from the pedaling of the bike. Even constant Russian shelling couldn't disrupt the opening of the Christmas tree in Kharkiv. For safety reasons, it was installed in the subway this year. The festive location with the House of St. Nicholas, several photo zones and entertainment for children was financed by local business.
We are IDPs. We fled the occupation from Melitopol district. We are very happy to celebrate the holiday. It is so important for our children. Do you like it here, girls? Yes.
Carols are heard at the opening of the New Year tree in Lviv. Instead of a Christmas star, there is a stylized anti-tank hedgehog on the top of the tree. The amount of lighting has been reduced. Illumination will consume 1 kilowatt per hour. This is even less than an electric kettle. 10 trees growing on the central square of the city were decorated in Kropivnitsky. It symbolizes Ukrainian cities that suffered the most from Russian aggression. But due to the full-scale war, Christmas trees haven't been set up in many cities of Ukraine. And our celebrations this year will be more different than ever from the way you celebrate. But Russians, terrorists, will not be able to steal Christmas from Ukrainians.
No one can steal Merry Christmas from Ukrainians. So that's all for today. That was Spotlight Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. And Merry Christmas to those who celebrate this. And see you next Friday.